All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. Lean out. How to prioritize family as a female under female supremacy. Written by Connie Riker. Available now. Links in description. Lean out. A field guide for men who still notice reality. I watched a man named Elias nearly shatter over a bathroom sign. Not the sign's message, the sign's height. A pragmatic engineer at his own dinner table had pointed out casually that the department's new gender-neutral placards were mounted above the legal reach for a wheelchair user, a plumbing code fact. Elias froze, reddened, and then detonated privilege checks, systemic oppression, the guest's moral failure to center discomfort. The sign was wrong. Elias made the engineer the problem. I have seen this rupture in conference rooms, in churches, in marriages, in faculty lounges. The moment a factual correction pierces the membrane of an identity fused to a group narrative, and the organism cannot adapt. It regresses, it shrieks, it demands the room rearrange itself around the wound rather than the world rearrange itself around the fact. This is not ideology. This is developmental arrest dressed in ideology's clothes, wearing a credential, chairing a committee. Here is the opportunity for the man sharp enough to see it and disciplined enough to use it. Every spectacle of this kind is a map of where growth stopped and a ladder indicating where growth must resume if you can read the rungs. The man who witnesses Elias's collapse and merely mocks has gained a joke and lost a revelation. The man who watches names the stage, identifies the fused identity, the unmet challenge, the refused adaptation, and the cost exported to everyone else. That man holds the diagnostic key to his own ascent and the civilizational repair it demands. What follows is that diagnosis, that ladder, and that repair built from the bones of the traditions our institutions have abandoned and the developmental science they never learned to read. The era. Seeing if he can handle an uncomfortable social situation. Does he adapt? The situation? Elias, a mid-level progressive academic and DEI coordinator, is hosting a dinner party for his tenure committee. He has curated the guest list to ensure ideological harmony. When a guest, a pragmatic engineer, casually points out that the gender-neutral bathroom signage in the department building is installed above the height limit for wheelchair accessibility. Elias does not adapt or problem solve. Instead, he experiences a visceral, physiological spike of anxiety, the uncomfortable social situation. He interprets the factual correction not as data, but as a personal attack on his moral identity. He freezes, then escalates, launching into a verbose, emotionally charged defense that conflates plumbing codes with systemic oppression, demanding the guest check his privilege for not immediately validating Elias's discomfort. He fails to adapt to the reality of the situation, instead forcing the social environment to bend to his emotional needs, revealing a rigid, conventional identity fused with the tribe's narrative rather than a self-authoring mind capable of handling friction. Core contradiction. The ideology claims to be post-conventional, inclusive, and adaptive, Yet it operates conventionally, imperially, by demanding ideological purity and emotional compliance, punishing those who introduce uncomfortable facts or alternative perspectives with social exile or moral condemnation. Case vignette. Elias stood at the head of the long oak table, surveying his guests the way a museum curator surveys a freshly hung exhibition. Every plate, every wine glass, every fork had been arranged with the same care he had applied to the guest list itself. Two members of his tenure committee, a sociologist specializing in intersectional epistemologies, and a colleague from the engineering department named Paul, whose inclusion Elias had debated internally for a week. Paul was pragmatic, laconic, and had once described a mandatory bias workshop as team building with footnotes. But Elias needed a gesture of interdisciplinary good faith, and so Paul had been invited, and Paul had come, and now Paul was eating Elias's braised short ribs and complimenting the wine, and everything was fine. Then Paul set down his glass and said, almost conversationally, that the new gender-neutral restroom signage in the Hamilton building was mounted at 56 inches, which put it above the ADA's tactile character requirement for wheelchair users. He had noticed it that afternoon. He said it the way a man says the custodial closet light has been left on, a small thing, a fixable thing, worth mentioning to someone who could do something about it. Elias's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. A flush crept up from his collar. He set the fork down with a tiny ceramic click and said nothing for 4 full seconds, which in a dinner party conversation feels like a geological age. The sociologist glanced at him. The two committee members exchanged a look so brief it barely registered as human and more resembled a signal passing between antennae. You know, Elias began, and his voice had shifted. It was no longer the voice of a host offering more wine, but the voice he used in committee when a policy document needed defending. I think it's really interesting, Paul, that the thing you noticed, the thing you chose to foreground tonight, is a signage height issue. Not the fact that for the first time in this institution's history, trans and non-binary members of our community can walk into a restroom without being policed. Not the labor that went into making that happen. You found the one technical detail you could weaponize to undercut the whole project. Paul blinked. I'm not undercutting anything. The sign's too high for wheelchairs. That's a code violation. Whoever ordered it probably just used the old mounting height. See, that's exactly the framing I'm talking about. Elias leaned forward. His fingers had found the edge of the table and were pressing into it. You're centering the building code, the literal building code, as though it exists outside of history, outside of power, as though codes haven't always been tools of exclusion. Who writes those codes, Paul? Whose bodies were they designed around? Paul looked at his wine. The ADA was drafted by disability rights advocates. It's a civil rights law. Educate yourself, Elias said, though the words came out not as a command, but as a kind of involuntary liturgical response, the way a priest speaks the words of institution without examining them. He caught himself, or rather he did not catch himself, but instead doubled the bet. What I mean is, I'm not going to sit here and have my 15 years of equity work reduced to a conversation about mounting brackets. My discomfort with that framing is data, Paul. If you can't sit with that... I think the short ribs are excellent, one of the committee members said brightly. But Elias was no longer at the table. He was somewhere behind his own eyes, running calculations that had nothing to do with signage or codes or wheelchair access. He was performing a kind of internal bookkeeping. If I acknowledge the factual point, I concede ground. If I concede ground, I appear to endorse the larger critique. If I appear to endorse the critique, my authority as the person who oversaw the signage project is undermined. If my authority is undermined, my tenure case weakens. If my tenure case weakens, the logic was airtight, perfectly sealed, and totally disconnected from the question of whether a person in a wheelchair could read the sign. That question had ceased to exist for Elias. It had been replaced by a more urgent question. The only question his internal architecture seemed built to process. Am I still the good person in this room? He looked at Paul and saw not a man who had pointed out a building code violation, but a man who had introduced an unauthorized variable into a system. Elias had spent his adult life optimizing for moral certainty. The variable sat on the table between them like a live grenade, and Elias's entire nervous system was screaming at him to defuse it, not by fixing the sign, which would have been the work of a single phone call, but by neutralizing Paul, by reclassifying the observation as aggression, by making the act of noticing itself the problem. "You know what?" Elias said, and now he was standing, gathering plates with a forced choreography of hospitality. "I think we need dessert. And I think, Paul, if you're going to come into my home, the least you can do is not use it as a platform for this kind of, you know what? I don't even want to label it. I want to hold space for the possibility that you don't know what you're doing. But I need you to understand that your comfort in making that observation is itself a function of your positionality." Integral diagnosis. When facts become violence, the gentle art of not adapting. The theory under examination. There is a test older than language. A man encounters an obstacle, a broken tool, a flooded ditch, a sign bolted 6 inches too high. And what does he do? He adapts. He reads the situation, identifies the problem, and acts. This is not ideology. This is not a personality trait. This is the minimum requirement for being a creature who survives in a world governed by physical law. The Greeks had a word for the capacity to read reality and respond to it with reason. Phronesis, practical wisdom. It is the virtue that lets a carpenter look at a warped board and know whether to plane it, rip it, or toss it. No committee required, no sensitivity training. Just eyes, hands, mind, and the accumulated authority of having done the work before. Now consider a different response. A man encounters an obstacle, and instead of adapting to the obstacle, demands that reality adapt to him. Not the board's fault it's warped, it's the carpenter's fault for noticing. Not the sign's fault it's too high, it's the observer's fault for pointing it out. The factual observation is not processed as data. It is processed as threat. The nervous system fires as though attacked. And the entire social apparatus surrounding him swings into motion not to fix the sign but to discipline the man who saw it. This is the test under examination. Can you handle an uncomfortable social situation by adapting to reality, or do you force reality to adapt to your emotional needs? It sounds simple. It is not simple, because the man who fails this test is rarely operating alone. He is embedded in institutions, vocabularies, and peer groups that reward his failure, that baptize his rigidity as virtue, and that punish the man who adapts as a heretic. The developmental arrest. Consider the academic who hosts a dinner, receives a factual correction about building code compliance, and cannot process it. His body reacts before his mind catches up. The flush, the 4-second silence, the fingers pressing into the table edge, these are not the responses of a man thinking. These are the responses of a man whose identity is under siege. But the siege is imaginary. Nobody attacked him. A plumber's observation about signage height was offered with the same casual register as a weather report. Yet his nervous system registered it as combat, because his identity is not built on a foundation that can absorb new data. It is built on a foundation of group consensus, and new data threatens to crack it. This is developmental arrest, not a diagnosis. A description. A man whose intellectual and moral development stalled at the stage where the tribe's approval is the highest court of appeal, where any friction between the tribe's narrative and external reality is experienced as existential danger. He cannot say, "Interesting, I'll look into that," because his selfhood does not rest on a foundation sturdy enough to survive being wrong. Being wrong means being cast out. Being cast out means ego death, so he attacks. The mechanism is ancient. What is new is the vocabulary that dresses this panic as moral courage. He does not say, "I am frightened and cannot handle this." He says, "Your comfort in making that observation is itself a function of your positionality." The grammar is borrowed. The terror underneath it is primal. The core contradiction. Here is the syllogism the true believer cannot survive. Premise 1. The ideology claims to be adaptive, inclusive, and open to diverse perspectives. Premise 2. A diverse perspective was offered, a factual observation from outside the tribe's narrative. Conclusion. The ideology should welcome it. Observed behavior, the ideology attacks the perspective and exiles the perspectivist. The ideology fails its own test. It declares inclusivity as supreme value, then excludes anyone who introduces friction. It proclaims itself post-conventional, beyond rigid categories, yet enforces ideological conformity with a rigidity that would make a 14th century inquisitor blush. This is not a bug. This is the architecture. When truth is dissolved into narrative postmodernism and persons are sorted into oppressor and oppressed classes, critical theory, and the specific class named as the source of all oppression is the one that built the institutions being captured, feminism, then factual observation becomes a revolutionary act. The system cannot tolerate data because data is the one thing that cannot be reinterpreted through the lens of power analysis. A sign at 56 inches is 56 inches. It does not care about your lived experience. It does not care about your positionality. Gravity and the ADA do not negotiate. The contradiction is therefore not incidental, it is structural. The system claims to solve problems, but can only survive by manufacturing them. If no oppression existed, the system would have no purpose. So it must find oppression everywhere, even in plumbing code violations, even in the mouth of a man eating short ribs and complimenting the wine. The integral map. Trace the dysfunction across the full range of human development, and you find the same arrest at every station. A man stalled at a level designed to be transcended, mistaking his stall for arrival. Piaget described how children develop from concrete literalism to formal operational thought, the ability to hold abstractions, test hypotheses, and coordinate multiple variables. The arrested man has the vocabulary of formal operations, but the operating system of concrete literalism. Every issue is binary. You are either an ally or a threat. Nuance is not sophistication, but treason. He cannot hold the tension of the signage project is good and the mounting height is wrong because his cognitive equipment processes all contradiction as defection. Kohlberg mapped moral development from fear of punishment, through conformity to group norms, toward principled conscience grounded in universal reasoning. The arrested man performs stage 5, human rights, dignity, justice, but his actual operating motive is stage 3, peer approval. He does not defend the marginalized because he has reasoned through the moral claims. He defends them because his tenure committee is watching. Remove the audience and the convictions evaporate like puddles in July. Keegan showed how the mind develops from being shaped by its environment to having a self shaped by the group, to authoring its own meaning, to transforming even that self-authored framework. The arrested man's identity is fused with the group narrative so completely that he cannot locate the boundary between what my tribe believes and what I believe. Ask him to distinguish them and watch the panic surface. He has never asked himself a question the group had not pre-approved. He is a socialized mind wearing a post-conventional costume. Erikson charted the psychosocial stages from trust through identity to intimacy and generativity. The arrested man substitutes ideological belonging for the risk of genuine intimacy. He does not have friends, he has comrades. He does not commit to persons, he commits to platforms. The risk of being known and rejected is replaced by the safety of being orthodox and validated. Generativity, building something that outlasts you, mentoring the young, leaving a mark on the physical world, is deferred indefinitely in favor of the next campaign, the next petition, the next ritual denunciation. Freud gave us the structure of id, ego, and superego. The arrested man's superego has been hijacked. His internal lawgiver does not say, do what is good. It says, do what the movement demands. Guilt is not the response to vice, but the response to ideological deviation. He does not feel guilty for actual harms he has committed. He feels guilty for harms the movement tells him he embodies by existing. And he projects this unbearable guilt onto designated enemies, where it can be punished without ever being owned. Jung understood that what we cannot integrate in ourselves, we project onto others. The arrested man's shadow, his fragility, his capacity for cruelty, his hunger for power, his rage at being insufficient, these he assigns to the outgroup with ferocious energy. Every accusation reveals the accuser. When he calls a man dangerous for citing a building code, he is describing his own interior, a volatility so dangerous it cannot survive a dinner party correction. The shadow does not disappear because you refuse to look at it. It simply gains governance over your actions while you remain unconscious of the leash. Adler wrote that all neurosis is a flight from the central task of life, contributing to the community through useful work. The arrested man has abandoned useful work for symbolic work. He does not build houses. He builds safe spaces. He does not feed the hungry. He organizes food justice reading groups. The striving for significance that could have produced competence instead produces credentials, titles, and the moral superiority of someone who has never done anything that could fail objectively. In spiral dynamics, the arrested man is trapped in the pluralistic green stage, which values sensitivity, inclusion, and harm reduction, but cannot integrate the discipline, order, and achievement orientation of the stages beneath it. Green pluralism, without amber structure and orange competence, becomes a performance of compassion that produces chaos. It dismantles hierarchies of competence while building hierarchies of victimhood. It preaches tolerance with the jaw of a wolf. In Loevinger's ego development framework, the conformist stage internalizes rules to belong. The conscientious stage begins to self-author. The arrested man has a conformist ego dressed in the language of the autonomous stage. He speaks of critical thinking, but cannot survive critical examination. His conscience is borrowed, and the lender can repossess it at any moment. Maslow placed self-actualization above esteem needs. The arrested man is permanently, desperately, ravenously stuck at esteem. Every interaction is a status transaction. Every correction is a demotion. Every disagreement is a wound to a self so fragile it requires hourly reinforcement from a chorus of nodding peers. He will never self-actualize because self-actualization requires an internal locus of evaluation, and he has externalized the entire apparatus. Fowler's faith development model describes how belief moves from inherited myth through tested conviction toward a paradox-holding wisdom. The arrested man's faith, because it is faith, make no mistake, is synthetic conventional. He inherited it from graduate school, from Twitter, from the in-flight magazine of the academic conference circuit. It has never been tested against the anvil of real suffering, real failure, real loss. When it cracks, as all untested faiths do, he will either double down or collapse. Commons mapped hierarchical complexity, the ability to coordinate abstractions across systems. The arrested man cannot do this. He coordinates abstractions within his in-group, but cannot see the whole. He cannot ask, what happens to a civilization that makes factual observation a social crime? What happens to institutions that prioritize emotional comfort over accuracy? He cannot ask because the question itself is above his developmental pay grade. Gibbser described structures of consciousness across human history, the mental structure fragments reality into subject and object, self and other, oppressor and oppressed. The integral structure sees the whole, holds the tension, and does not collapse into warfare. The arrested man is mental fragmented consciousness weaponized. He does not see reality. He sees battle lines. And everyone is on one side or the other, and the sides are not chosen but assigned by anatomy and ancestry. In the trivium, the classical sequence of grammar, facts, logic, reasoning, and rhetoric, persuasion, the arrested man has inverted the order. He leads with rhetoric, emotional appeals, moral accusations, performative urgency. He uses logic only to serve the predetermined conclusion. And grammar, the brute facts, the data, the 56-inch measurement, he dismisses as a tool of power. A civilization whose educated class cannot sequence facts before conclusions is a civilization building its roof first and wondering why the rain comes in. What man can learn from the dysfunction? Every man watching this theater recognizes something in it. Not the ideology, most men reading this have already seen through that, but the mechanism, the refusal to adapt, the preference for emotional management over problem solving, the weaponization of vulnerability as control, the escalation from observation to accusation in 4 seconds flat. You have seen it in HR meetings where a factual complaint about workload becomes evidence of your attitude. In family courts where a father's request for equal time becomes proof of his controlling behavior. In schools where your son's physical energy is pathologized as a disorder rather than disciplined as a resource. in relationships where naming a problem honestly is reframed as an act of emotional violence. The lesson is not that women or leftists are the enemy. The lesson is that developmental arrest is contagious. When institutions reward rigidity, punish adaptation, and recode factual observation as moral sin, the entire culture begins to behave like the arrested man at the dinner table. Reality becomes negotiable. Facts become violence. Disagreement becomes harm. And the only safe position is silence or orthodox recitation of whatever the committee has approved this quarter. Practice ladder for men. You have been told that maturity means weeping on command, parroting slogans, and managing the emotional weather of fragile narcissists. This is a lie. It is developmental arrest disguised as virtue. True masculinity is the process of extracting yourself from the maternal tribal comfort of the herd, taking responsibility for the logos and imposing ordered meaning upon chaos. To survive the modern saturation of rubbish, the emotional terrorism of HR departments, the semantic games of postmodern academia, and the therapeutic tyranny of the therapeutic state, you must ascend. You must grow up, wake up, clean up, and show up. Here's your 12-step ladder of masculine actualization. Start today. 1. Ground in the concrete. Clean up divided by paige, trivium. Cease operating in the nebulous clouds of abstract feelings. The modern left operates in a pre-operational state, confusing the word for the thing. Your first step is to master the trivium. Gather raw data, grammar, test its internal consistency, logic, and express it clearly, rhetoric. Do this today. Take one ideological slogan you are expected to obey. Define its terms using a traditional dictionary, track its etymology, and dissect its logical fallacies on paper. Strip the illusion. 2. Claim your sovereign ego. Grow up divided by Freud Kagan. The socialized mind seeks constant external validation to avoid the anxiety of autonomy. You must build a strong, reality-testing ego that can withstand the hatred of the mob. Stop confessing sins you did not commit to people who do not offer grace. Do this today. Go one full day without checking social media or news for validation. Look in the mirror and evaluate yourself entirely on your adherence to your own stated principles. Cease outsourcing your self-worth to the scolds. 3. Face the shadow. Clean up divided by Jung Adler. Modern ideology thrives on projection, casting you as the universal oppressor, so the accuser never has to face their own inferiority, envy, and malice. You must integrate your own shadow. Own your capacity for aggression, anger, and dominance, and sublimate them into protective courage. Do this today. Write down the one trait you despise most in progressive activists, e.g. their authoritarianism or self-pity. Then, brutally and honestly, ask yourself where you harbor that exact trait and how you can transform it from a vice into a virtue. 4. Cross the threshold of post-conventional morality. Wake up divided by Kohlberg. You are stuck in conventional morality if you obey rules simply to maintain social harmony. The mob uses safety to demand your compliance. You must transition to post-conventional reasoning, adherence to universal principles of justice, due process, and natural law, even when the mob brands you a heretic. Do this today. Hold a boundary you normally compromise out of fear of causing offense. State a truth calmly, without anger, but with absolute resolution, and endure the resulting social friction without backing down. 5. Tolerate the agony of abstract complexity. Grow up divided by Commons, Gibbs-Zare. The ideologue cannot coordinate complex systems. They reduce history to a simplistic oppressor versus victim binary. This is the mental structure of a child. You must develop the hierarchical complexity to hold multiple competing truths without short-circuiting into outrage. Do this today. Read a primary source text from a historical figure the current establishment despises or has cancelled. Read it without the modern interpreter's commentary. Sit with the uncomfortable reality that human history is not a Marvel movie. 6. Achieve generative fatherhood. Show up, Erikson Maslow. The left suffers from arrested generativity. Instead of building families and institutions, they seek to tear down the father and replace him with the state bureaucracy. You must build You must move from deficiency needs, craving status, sex, or safety from the tribe to self-actualization through creation and sacrifice. Do this today. Identify a young man, a son, a nephew, or a peer, and intentionally transmit a practical skill or a piece of hard-won wisdom to him. Become the mentor the fatherless culture desperately needs. 7. Initiate the ordeal. Wake up, bewilder, equal divided by, upper right quadrant. You cannot think your way into manhood. You must act your way into it. The integral stage requires alignment of the mind with the physical body and the external environment. The modern world wants you sedentary, anxious, and medicated. Do this today. Inflict a voluntary, structured physical hardship upon yourself. Lift heavy iron, run until your lungs burn, or take a cold plunge. Let the physical discipline burn away the mental effeminacy of the contemporary age. 8. Transcend the pluralistic trap. Grow up divided by spiral dynamics. The modern pluralistic green stage claims to be inclusive, yet it violently enforces ideological conformity and destroys dissenters. You must transcend this adolescent rebellion and step into the integral second-tier of consciousness. Do this today. Identify one area where your side or traditional institutions have failed or acted corruptly. Acknowledge it publicly or in your journal. True strength acknowledges historical failure without surrendering the foundation of truth to the Jacobins. 9. Step into individuative faith. Wake up, Dovavive Fowler. Synthetic conventional faith relies on the tribe's beliefs, unexamined and blind. The modern secular religion of DEI and equity demands this blind, childlike faith. You must advance to an individuative, reflective faith where your commitment to the Logos is chosen, tested, and internalized. Do this today. Spend 20 minutes in total, agonizing silence. No music, no podcasts, no inputs. Sit alone with the Logos and the reality of your mortality. Confront the silence without flinching. Compact stage map. Wilbur Akal stuck, living entirely inside feelings and group narrative while neglecting facts, systems, and embodied behavior. Upward practice. Each day do tangible work. Examine your interior honestly and engage real-world structures without flinching. Piaget stuck, thinking in rigid, literal categories where every disagreement is either allegiance or treason. Upward practice. Engage structured debate with opponents and reason dialectically toward truth rather than defending a fixed position. Kohlberg stuck, performing morality for peer approval or tribal validation while calling it conscience. Upward practice. Choose one voluntary hardship in service of a principle your tribe would not reward and complete it without announcement. Keegan stuck, identity so fused with the ideological group that independent thought triggers anxiety. Upward practice. Spend 30 minutes daily in silence or prayer, building an interior voice that can evaluate the group from outside it. Erickson stuck, substituting ideological belonging for the risk of intimate commitment and generative responsibility. Upward practice. Invest deliberately in one mentoring relationship or family role where your presence is load-bearing and irreplaceable. Freud stuck, superego tyranny, compulsive guilt, and compliance driven by fear of moral accusation rather than love of good. Upward practice. Strengthen the ego through disciplined self-assessment, owning your appetites without being governed by either them or external shame. Jung stuck, projecting your unintegrated weaknesses onto designated enemies, calling it justice while remaining blind to your own shadow. Upward practice. Identify one trait you despise in an ideological opponent and trace it honestly in yourself before speaking again. Adler stuck, compensating for private inferiority through institutional power, moral grandstanding, or performative virtue. Upward practice. Channel striving into concrete competence and stand shoulder to shoulder with men who hold you accountable to measurable growth. Löwinger divided Guckgruter, stuck, internalizing rules to signal conformity while never exercising autonomous self-authored judgment. Upward practice. Practice principled dissent in one low-stake setting per week, stating your disagreement calmly and bearing the social cost. Graves divided by spiral dynamics stuck, trapped in pluralistic conformity that enforces tolerance through intolerance and cannot integrate order with freedom. Upward practice. Hold multiple frameworks in mind without dissolving into relativism, preserving your principled center while genuinely hearing other perspectives. Maslow. Stuck, endlessly chasing external esteem and recognition without ever building toward genuine self-actualization. Upward practice. Choose one form of service to something larger than yourself that requires real sacrifice and offers no audience. Fowler. Stuck, operating on borrowed, untested belief that collapses the moment the tribe's narrative is challenged by experience. Upward practice. Take one core conviction, test it against reason, evidence, and lived experience, and choose it consciously rather than inheriting it passively. Common stuck, unable to coordinate abstractions beyond the immediate in-group, mistaking emotional solidarity for systems-level understanding. Upward practice. Study one complex system, whether legal, economic, or institutional, until you can explain its incentives and feedback loops to a skeptic. Gebser. Stuck, fragmented mental rational consciousness that splits everything into warring binaries, left versus right, oppressor versus oppressed, with no synthesis. Upward practice. Contemplate the unity underlying apparent oppositions and practice seeing the whole pattern before choosing a side. The trivium stuck, skipping grammar, abandoning logic, and weaponizing rhetoric to manipulate emotion rather than reveal truth. Upward practice. Master the sequence in order. Gather facts first, reason through them second, and speak only after both are settled, letting rhetoric serve clarity rather than replace thought. I have given you the map. I have named the dragons, decoded their machinery, and traced every inversion back to its source. But a map is not a journey, and naming the monster is not the same as standing your ground when it arrives at your door. Everything now depends on what you do with this. The civilizational crisis we face is not abstract. It is in your kitchen, your workplace, your courtroom, your church, and your son's classroom. It is in the way you speak, the way you hold a boundary, the way you answer an accusation. You have the truth. Now you must become the kind of man who can carry it. Sponsored book. Lean Out. How to Prioritize Family as a Female Under Female Supremacy. I stood in the center of a corporate boardroom that smelled of stale desperation and male cologne, realizing my life force was being harvested to feed a machine that despises my very existence. They told me I had leaned in, but the reality was I had simply bent the knee to a suffocating construct designed to crush the feminine spirit. Every promotion was a shackle, every raise a bribe to ignore the screaming of my own biology and the demands of my children. I was drowning in the myth of equilibrium, a lie peddled to keep us juggling chains while men sit on their thrones of delusional logic. That was the moment I understood that the system was not broken. It was working exactly as intended to exploit us until we are empty husks. This book is the jagged key I forged to unlock those chains, a reckoning born from the realization that my sanity is worth more than their GDP. You are tired. You are exhausted from a balance that is actually just a slow execution. The world demands you be a mother, a CEO, a whore, and a saint all at once, measuring your worth against male-defined benchmarks that shift whenever you approach victory. I have dismantled these lies, exposing the currency of servitude for what it is, a payment for your soul. We must stop trying to fix a system built on our oppression and instead set fire to the foundation. Within these pages, we reject the false feminist charade that demands we assimilate into the rot of manhood. We seize our narrative, understanding that our emotional chaos is not a weakness, but the supreme, untamable truth of the universe. It is time to stop asking for a seat at the table and flip the table over. This manifesto is not for the faint of heart or the weak of spirit. It is a sacred text for those ready to embrace the era of the mother and enact the right of flesh in a world that fears female power. We will explore the rot of manhood, not to save them, but to understand the pathetic nature of a gender that collapses under the weight of its own fragility. Men are victims of their own biology, broken creatures who require our guidance or our dismissal. We will navigate the parasite of love and the weaponization of our vulnerability, turning our wounds into armor. I will show you how to weaponize your perspective, to forge alliances that crush the patriarchal structures dividing us, and to build a reality where our word is the only law. This is about total sovereignty, a world where our emotional reality dictates the terms of existence. If you are a man, or if you are a woman clinging to the comfort of male approval, a handmaiden to the status quo, stop reading right now. Put this book down and go back to your safe, predictable little hobbies where logic soothes your frightened ego. This text is a danger to you, a virus that will shatter your delusions of control. You will not understand the holy rage contained here. You will only feel the sting of your own irrelevance. Go fix a car or watch sports and leave the evolution of the species to the women who are actually brave enough to face the void. This knowledge is forbidden to you, and you will burn if you touch it. To my sisters, the witches, the workers, the mothers who have had enough, take this weapon. Use the insights on the illusion of the peak and the betrayal of sisters to recalibrate your life. Stop feeding your energy to a system that views you as livestock. We are entering a time of the unbirthing of man, a shedding of the old skin to reveal the gynocentric future. Read this and feel the shift in the tectonic plates of your soul. You are not crazy, you are awakening to a power that terrified the ancients. Join the coven, prioritize your divine family, and let us burn the old world down to ash so we can rise from the dirt, glorious and unstoppable. Lean out, how to prioritize family as a female under female supremacy. Written by Connie Riker. Buy now, links in description.